Hello and welcome to the second subpool. Here's our middle of the submission bracket, with the preliminary fleets notwithstanding. Of note though, do want to point out that this is an exact fleet recycled from a previous submission by Armifer. He just sent it in and said, "Oh no, that's good enough." So that's a bold move. That is a bold move. We've also got Mons being a Meanieface again. That's always important because Mons is a Meanieface and people need to know. But let's get this ball rolling. Up first we have Armifer up against Kamikazedalek. Dalek was talking about how he was doing some weird shit before, and looking at his ships, I think these are just the regular drones, and he's got some of the quantum doom beams. I'm not sure whether those are going to try and kite or not. The AI could do either one. And then we've got Armifer ships, which in the traditional Armifer pattern have these sort of arms on the front made out of containers. But they also have plenty of lasers that are undoubtedly all on point defense, and a couple of the plasma cannons. These things generally take forever to kill. You can also see he's got a lot of space between his core and his generators, which helps prevent accidental ruptures. These guys have missiles for days. Oh, I remember, these are asymmetrical and it irritates the shit out of me. And then little drone platforms. So let's see how this fight's gonna go. Yep, you can kind of see that Kamikazedalek's fleet is deciding to kite, but Armifer has a ton of point defense, which means that those drones are not even able to get close enough to actually do their job. In the meantime, Armifer's fleet is slowly catching up. And Dalek only has so much arena before he's just going to run out of space in general. All these poor little B ships having a bad day. Those little ships from Kamikazedalek are doing pretty good damage with those quantum doom beams, but the AI decided not to use them early. It wanted to wait until it had no room to maneuver, and as a result, tended to just get shot up. I'm guessing with the misbehaving that they were doing, they were supposed to kind of hit and run a little earlier, but that's not what they seemed to want to do. B drones are actually rather impressive too, though. As long as they're not firing at a ship that's coded in point defense, they should be alright. But Armifer's big guys have point defense in bulk everywhere, which kind of nullifies the drones pretty effectively. And yeah. If this is the Lightfoot Brigade, what is the Heavyfoot Brigade? And do I really want to know? Yeah, Armifer's big ships are a certain designers have certain aesthetics and patterns that they tend to follow, and as a result you can generally recognize their fleets regardless of whether or not it's under their name. And these big guys here are a very Armifer design. If you see something that looks like that, it's probably an Armifer ship. Although his ships are mostly made publicly available, so anyone could theoretically use them, though most people have better scruples than to just copy somebody else's ship and put their name on it. Yeah, it is exactly the same one as what Armor first submitted in June. There have been no changes to it at all. It's very brave. And up next we have Drills up against Armifer. And Drills is, he's also kind of rolling a little bit heavy, but compared to Armifer's ships, even Drill's heaviest ship isn't that big. But Drills does have more firepower on his ship than Armifer does on any one of his. But I think Armifer overall has the advantage. A lot of damage output. I do kind of like the hammerhead shark looking ship that has been cut in half and no longer looks like a hammerhead. I forgot to pause on Drill's fleet. I'll do that at the beginning of the next round. But Drill's holding on pretty well. You can see the lasers are kind of out of range, which the Terran lasers actually do a lot of damage too, especially for their cost. But they do have the disadvantage of being very short range weapons. And using too many of them can trigger the time dilation rule. And here we see one of the large ships using its containers to intercept enemy missiles, giving this guy here a little bit of time to regenerate. I'm actually amazed how long this thing has survived. Was not expecting it to be around this long. And yeah, Drills did his usual naming scheme where originally the fleet was called, I think, Riot Squad, and then a new update, or then he updated it and called it Riot Squad Boiz, and then here come that Riot Squad Boiz. Just there's frogs on bicycles everywhere. Or unicycles, whatever. The big ship from Drills did hold out for a very long time, which is pretty impressive. Armifer's fleet is extremely heavily armored, but it also does pack an abundance of firepower too. So being able to withstand as much punishment as it did is rather impressive. But I never gave it its fair due. So this was the guy that held out for a really long time in the last round. Which you can kind of see, he's got a lot of different weapons. The proton swords here, I didn't even see those. But no doubt they did a boatload of damage themselves. These almost look like they're inspired by, at least in part, by some of the other long-range torpedo kiters we've seen. This one's got a proton sword on it, but I don't think the proton sword is very well used in a ship like that. Proton swords have an extremely close range, and so you generally want your ship to be pretty durable when you're using them in order to actually use them well. This guy is the one I was talking about. It's the hammerhead looking one. You've got plasma mortars and torpedoes. The plasma mortars should give a ton of splash radius, but I think last time we saw it just fly up to stuff and park in front of it, which is not great use for mortars. But let's see how round 2 goes. Drills is actually using a variety of ships too, which is always fun to see. I think there's like 6 or 7 different designs in his fleet. Giant shellless snails. So slugs. A good chunk of drones being used by both fleets as well. The Armor preferring the smaller, more disposable drone ships, which kind of have their advantage, mostly in that they're cheap, so if you lose them it's not that big of a deal. But if the enemy can't kill them, then the drones do stack up. And drones are one of those weapons that slowly ramp up. However, if the ship lives long enough, then the drones start to become a force to be reckoned with. And henceforth, the container arms shall hereby be referred to as eye stalks, because they because these things kind of look like slugs. Big old armored death slugs. Yeah, slugs have eyes. They've got eye stalks. If you poke them, they pull them back too, just like snails do. And Armor for 18 takes the round. Next up, we have Floof up against Armor for 18. Floof with these rectangular sentinel ships, using the medium-sized thrusters rather than the large ones for all of its internal maneuvering thrust. And the bigger cannons, of course, are annihilators, the smaller ones are plasma bolts. And I think those are the only weapons that Floof is using. The Sentinels don't really have much in the way of weapon variety, but they're one of those factions that doesn't need it because the weapons that they have are basically amazing. Let's see how these do. I like the red thruster trails too. And you can see the rectangular ships on the front of them have a few of the melee spikes on the front. Kinda dug into this guy a little bit. You know, like most of him. And now it turns into a bit of a slugging match. And slugging matches are exactly what Sentinels want. It's basically an ideal environment for Sentinels. Alright, have a good night. Command execute. I really do like annihilators. They are solid weapons. You can see the largest ship for Floof doesn't even look like it's been scratched yet. I think the little rammers kinda absorbed a bunch of the damage for it early on. You can also see Floof has colored patterns in here as well, which means that some of these blocks are going to be the armor plating and some of them are probably just core hull. And the core hull is lighter but less durable than the armor plating. However, core hull is still better than any other factions offering for armor. Yeah, if you ever want big, heavy, immovable blocks of metal, Sentinels are the go-to faction. Everything they do is just durable and full of hatred. And Floof has a pretty decent point lead already. Or well, still, I should say. The first round is almost over. I don't know that Armorfer is going to be able to make up the point difference, especially with the little guys running in like that, getting brave. And you can see the splash radius on those Annihilators really doing work on smaller craft. They're doing work on the larger things. Oh yes, Sentinel clipping. Sentinels do this. Nobody else does. Nobody knows why. But the what is it? You can see the splash radius is pretty sizable even on these larger ships from Armorfer's fleet. But you can really gain an appreciation for just how large that splash radius is when it's taking apart smaller stuff as well. Against the bigger guys, you'll see several rows of armor just kind of disappear all at once. But against the smaller guys, it's entire ships getting evaporated the same way. The Brawler's taking some fire, but like I said, Sentinel armor is the best armor in the game. If these generators go up though, that could be a problem. That's going to take out a big section of the back of the ship, which is already a section. Or it's not going to take out a big section because Sentinel armor is impressive. But the taking away that power generation, you can see the Annihilators aren't firing the same anymore. The Sentinel core generates a ton of power, but the Sentinel weapons also consume a ton. So as a result, they don't necessarily, or Floof's Brawler can't continue its intended rate of fire without those generators. That Brawler's still somehow holding on though, but Armorfer takes round 2 on points. So now let's see if round 3 goes any different. This Brawler heading, or the Rammer heading directly in, I thought was going to be a bit more effective, but apparently it wasn't. Annihilators for days though. But here's what I mean about layers of armor just kind of evaporating all at once. And that's how the Annihilators do. It's also worth noting that relative to the other mainstay weapons, Annihilators are also rather long range, which is pretty useful for the most part. It's one of the reasons that I think Sentinel Brawlers are generally better than others. Their damage tends to be pretty sticky on account of the fact that it's mostly alpha related, but also on a decent enough cooldown that the enemy doesn't generally get that much time to recover. They've got a bunch of splash damage, good range. Ungodly amounts of health, you know, everything a brawler really needs. But Armorford doing a really good job of grabbing a points lead early. Only the brawlers left though, so everything's kind of got to work its way over to the brawler now. But you can see the difference in rate of fire with and without the generators. When the generators died on Floof's brawler last round, that more or less sealed its fate, I think. But you can see how quickly it just takes apart smaller craft. Might as well have not even been there. That little drone distractor doing its job very well. Got to appreciate a distractor with the right level of bravery. I think that was 3 or 4 volleys coming from the side, completely killed one of Armorford's ships. Annihilators are some seriously nasty weapons. And yeah, Floof is a couple hundred points ahead, and there's not much time left on this clock. If something doesn't change fast, it looks like Floof will be taking the match. And I think we can all but say that Floof's got the match in the bag. Boom. Alright, so now we've got Armor for 18 up against Flypaste. Flypaste using his usual format where he's got the little arms to protect against splash damage. He's got a lot of torpedoes from what I'm seeing. One of those proton beams. I think that's a new design. But overall, just the next evolution in Flypaste's fleet. But Flypaste prides himself on the behavior of his ships, where they're kind of like heavy skirmishers. They move in, do some damage, take some damage, disengage, and come back. So let's see if they do that. You can kind of see them backing off as they take damage. So I think Flypaste's Flypaste's fleet is behaving pretty well. But they did give up a lot of early points, which is another problem Flypaste talks about having, whereas his fleet just cops up a lot of points and then spends the rest of the match trying to claw it back. But I don't know that they're going to be able to against Armor for 18's fleet. There's just a lot of health to claw through. Yeah, we are seeing some pretty good progress on this guy. Let's see, what are we seeing here? Plasma cannons, some mortars. But the clock is winding down. I'm thinking round 1 is going to go in favor of Armor First Fleet. Even with Flypaste picking up a few really good kills here at the end. And Armor for 18 takes round 1. Flypaste does have a lot of torpedoes, which I think would be pretty instrumental in taking apart Armor First fleet, but I think Armor First point defense is playing havoc with them. If you send your torpedo volleys at Armor First lasers piecemeal, then he'll more or less be able to just take apart an almost unlimited number of torpedoes. You would have to fire individual, or you would have to fire in volleys rather than in segments. But because Flypaste fleet has its torpedoes sort of distributed throughout the fleet, it ends up not launching in giant volleys the same way. Oh, what did I say? Almost unlimited? Flypaste fleet doing a much better job this time around though. Picking up more kills, leaking fewer points. I think it might actually have the ability to come back and win round 2. Though whether round 1 was a fluke or round 2 is a fluke will remain to be seen. With the reassembly AI, it could really go either way. And Armor for 18 takes the match anyway. So up next we have Armor for 18 up against Climhazzard. So Climhazzard is using these things, which are spinners with a plasma cannon in the center. The large Terran plasmas are actually pretty impressive too. So they should be pretty solid. And this is going to be a missile kiter. These things are going to be nightmares. They're going to be ridiculously fast. What are you? Point fillers. Okay. Point fillers and distractors. So let's see how this holds up. Little twitchy missile ships I think are going to be a big problem for Armor First fleet, as long as they don't get too close. I don't think the plasma cannons are ever going to really be able to connect. At least not with any consistency. In the meantime, so one of the things that you have to keep in mind with spinners, at least when you're not in the NMSS format, the rate of spinning is kept low enough that it's not generally an issue. But it's possible when you're designing a spinner without any limitations to create one that spins so fast that its turrets can't keep up with the rate of rotation. And if that happens, then the ship will just not fire its guns most of the time, which is a colossal waste of points investment. A lot of people use fixed mount weapons like torpedoes and antimatters and stuff like that, and mines, and that kind of gets around that issue. But like Climhazzard here has these guys with the plasma cannons in the middle. if the ships were spinning fast enough, then the plasma cannons wouldn't be able to track their target, and you'd lose a lot of damage per second because they'd have no uptime. And have a good night, Al. Climhazzard are doing a very good job of racking up points. I think the plasma spinners from Climhazzard are cleaning up some of the big guys. And now it looks like they're starting to focus fire a little more. You can kind of see them swarming around this one here. Really good showing from Climhazzard too. Climhazzard and Armor have both been sort of heavyweights in the NMSS tournaments of the past. And both of them showing that they kind of earned that spot. They didn't just get it by happenstance. And yeah, there are plenty of rammers. Some of them are in this pool, most of them are in the next. The abuse pool will, of course, be abuse. Yeah, I don't think there are any Tinkerel submissions this time around. There just aren't enough people designing Tinkerel ships anymore these days. For shame. And it looks a lot more like Armor is going to be running away with round 2. I think the plasma cannon ships kind of got pinched between some of the big guys out of Armor's fleet, and as a result, they didn't have anywhere to escape to. And with that, then with the plasma cannon ships down, I don't think Climhazzard's fleet has the damage to really bring those big armor for ships down. And of course, if you can't kill those, then you're never going to be able to rack up the points you need to take a round from armor for. And Pucket Craftman, before you decide whether or not melee needs a nerf, I would ask that you wait until you see what Duke has done with them. Because his little rammers are assholes. But Armor for Take Drone 2. I think Husk also has some rammers in here. The big problem with rammers is that a small, almost zero, or feels like almost zero, a negligible point ramming ship can drive through anything. Doesn't really matter what it is. But if they're built the way that a lot of the people on Discord have been building them, they're also very arbitrary. The random placement has a colossal effect on how effective they are. So some rounds they'll clean up like a whole fleet in seconds, some rounds they'll just miss and do nothing for 2.5 minutes. Yeah, but that's just it. You won't dodge the rammer because the reassembly AI doesn't dodge ships. And the rammers are faster than you. So if they are in line and approaching, then your ship's just going to get hit. Yeah, I think Husk has tiny rammers, Duke has mid-size rammers. And this one's rather close. Under a minute and only 700 points apart. This guy piecing himself back together. Gotta rebuild that gun. And now get in there with the pew pew. Seems like Climhazzard's plasma ships are a bit skittish. I think a lot of that might just have to be with how bounding boxes are calculated. I think it's maintaining distance based on the core, but firing based on the bounding box. Something of that nature. But Climhazzard has taken a pretty hefty point lead. So it looks like Clim will be taking the match. So up next we have Husk up against Armifer. And Husk brought his pretty typical order spinner. It's got some melee spikes on the outside, a bunch of guns hyperstacked in the middle. And he brought these style of rammers, which are just tiny, cheap, and really fast. They're probably going to slice right through Armifer's ships. But there you can see the rammer just kind of casually drove through the ship. I do love a fin or a good bit of trash talk. Adds a little spice, you know. Well, I do have the one grudge match. The gauntlet was cast between Flypaste and Feathers, so I have to have them fight. I suppose after then I could have you and Husk fight if you don't make it otherwise. Yeah, PokeCraftman. If you go in the forums, it has my email address to submit fleets to. If you just send a fleet over, I'll have it fight some stuff after the tournament if you want. You're only just now officially not liking the tournament? I thought we were well into not liking the tournament phase. Yeah, you can see the rammers just casually gliding through armor first ships. I do like Husk spinners though. They look nice, they behave well. They're carrying sentinel guns. Everything someone could ask for in a ship. Oh yeah, and the thumbnail bounce is it's a tradition for spinners. Just bounce that thumbnail. It's because the outside perimeter of the ship is square. So as you rotate a square, you know, the height and the width would apparently change. So it's zooming in and out to keep the square the same height as the thumbnail. And next up we have Kamikazedalek up against Drills. Let's see how the swarm handles these guys. It does not look great. That is not promising for the swarm at all. But that's what happens when you bring StarCraft to Reassembly, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Reminds me of Befriend. A lot of Befriend. And now, Heart of the Swarm up against Floofs. I feel like they're being a bit better behaved here. Sentinel point defense isn't particularly great, which means those drones are going to live a lot longer, but when they decide to hug the melee spikes, that's never going to work out in the favor of the drone or of the B ships. Hugging melee spikes is ill-advised. And Floof takes round one. Dalek's fleet seems to be a bit better behaved this time around. Although they do still show an affinity for charging at the enemy en masse. I think the commander of the fleet might be some sort of lemming. And up next we have Kamikazedalek up against Flypaste. And would you say that their shields be expensive? And the swarm might fare a bit better here. Flypaste is using a lot of mortars and apparently some blast pulsers throughout his fleet. The blast pulsers should do a pretty bang up job against the shields, but a lot less instantly devastating than a rack of annihilators, for example. You can see Kamikazedalek did score some extra points this round, or last round, but Flypaste fleet is just too durable. Once those shields go down, there's basically nothing left of Kamikazedalek ships, and so they tend to fall apart pretty quickly. And yeah, Kamikazedalek, you can't really rely on the behavior selector from the campaign mode, because when you load it into tournament, it overwrites it with the default dynamic behavior anyway. So if you're building tournament ships in campaign mode, you should always leave them on dynamic. Otherwise, unpredictable things will happen. They protect, we attack. Yeah, I could see the idea of making them small enough to fit several inside of a shield length being kind of enticing, but overall I think shields are just a little too fragile for direct combat. And now we have Kamikazedalek up against Husk. And I'm sorry, Dalek, I do not think this is gonna go your way. You can see the spinners just playing absolute hell. Or the rammers. The spinners are also playing absolute hell, but the rammers were doing it first. The spinners are just being trendy bandwagoners. And Husk takes round one. I still think my favorite swarm ships that I've built were 500p ships that were basically heavily armored and relatively slow moving, but they carried some mid and long range weapons. Like I think each one had a missile launcher, and its primary damage sources were drones and torpedoes. Those things were nasty as hell. And Husk takes it. So next up we have Drills up against Floof. And Drill's fleet is kind of like a mixed, partial brawling, partial kiting fleet. I don't think the brawling part is going to work out well. Brawling against Sentinels is generally not a great idea. But the kiting may hold up pretty well, because Floof's only long-range weapons are the Annihilators. Floof doesn't have any missiles. The rammers are pretty slow, so the kiters, if they behave well, are going to have a pretty easy time just tagging damage. I think a lot of it is going to boil down to how fast and how many points Floof is able to score. And you can see here the big ship from Drills is still alive, but not for much longer. There it goes. And yeah, there's a forum thread on there's a thread on the forums. August NMSS tournament. That's the one you're looking for. It'll have rules that you have to abide by and stuff to submit. It's too late to get into the official tournament, but after the tournament itself, I'll go ahead and throw you in a couple matches if you'd like. Yeah, I think Floof has enough of a point lead to ride out the rest of this one pretty easily. Yeah, basically, these tournaments take a while. I don't like to skip things because shit can turn around real fast sometimes. But here you can see some of the kiters trying to take apart one of the brawlers, but Sentinels are just too durable. Being able to pick up, Floof was able to pick up like 12,000 points pretty early in the fight, just largely killing the big guy and a couple of the other close range things. And if Floof's able to replicate that again, I don't think Drills is going to be able to put enough points on the board to win, even if nothing else gets caught out. That big ship almost went down early. Actually, it still might. Giant segment of its ship missing. And a big thing to keep in mind is that the process of streaming and encoding also puts a pretty heavy load on your processor and GPU, which of course detracts from the amount that's available to actually run the game simulation. And that's a big part of why I do evaluations at 120 physics updates and the tournament at 90. There won't be any more no restrictions tournaments because people abused the very mechanics of the game to the point where no restrictions tournament, the only way to win a no restrictions tournament is to go find a nuke troll and be a nuke troll. If you, in my signature there's a link to the Reassembly tournament archive. I forget what tournaments they were in, but if you look for fleets named Japanese Bughouse and the Behemoth, I would be very surprised if you were able to build anything that could beat those in the same point bracket. And I think there's the Ancient as well. They're all kind of older fleets, but that was before trolls were banned and nukes were banned. And so nuke trolls won the day every time. And Floof takes round 2. So up next we have drills against Flypaste. Now one of the problems Drills is going to have here is that Flypaste's fleet in general is going to be more than fast enough to actually catch up to all of his kiters. So what Drills needs to happen is to have his brawler take apart whatever it can from Flypaste. But Flypaste also designed his ships to not be overly vulnerable, which I think means we're probably going to see a Flypaste win here. But we'll see how it plays out. I do feel like Flypaste has the advantage overall. So the neutral fleets, what it is there were 2 or 3 ships in the fleet that had a single nuclear missile launcher, and sometimes they'll have flurry missiles or whatever on the ship as well, but the centerpiece is a nuclear missile. Then the rest of the fleet were just very large unarmed ships. And when I say very large, I mean they were like bounding box was 900 something units on everything, and there were like 16 or 17 ships in the fleet, all of which were roughly that size. And so nukes would come from arbitrary directions within the enemy fleet, while the enemy fleet was so large it was impossible to kill without nukes. Yeah, if you don't have ships that don't use asteroid thrusters, you can bring those, but asteroid thrusters have proven to also be an outlier. They started getting banned a few tournaments back because Terran ships could just be too big and too cheap. Yeah, mostly what I want to do is put you up against some melee spikes and put to the test your firepower prediction. And Flypaste tanks round 1. Much as I thought, Drills needs that brawler to do a lot of damage to Flypaste fleet. And as we saw, Flypaste asked while I was talking about some of the other stuff, but as we saw with the brawler, Flypaste ships were very well behaved and they didn't get themselves caught out, so the brawler wasn't able to actually do all the damage it needed to do. And so Flypaste was able to build up a pretty big point lead, and I don't know if he won by kills. I wasn't really paying close enough attention, but I wouldn't be too surprised if this round went about the same. You can see Flypaste running down all the kiters, which, as I said, Flypaste fleet is faster than most of the others, and so they'll be able to run down the kiters pretty easily. And Drills really needs this brawler to do its work, but the brawler isn't able to actually connect well enough. At least not for as long as it needs to, before Flypaste ships are disengaging. Flypaste likes to brag about his ability to get the AI to behave, and it appears that he's earned it. And Pokecraftman, just remember that even if you kill the core, the melee spikes that are in motion are still lethal. And it's a specific sentinel block that's the triangles that they were talking about, called armor spike, I think is the actual name of the part. It might save from dead spikes, but I don't think the manipulators will have enough time to apply enough force to actually stop the rammer, let alone the spikes after the rammer's dead. Assuming the manipulator hasn't switched to a different target and is actually still targeting the individual spikes. And Flypaste takes the match. So next up we have Drills up against Climhazzard. And Climhazzard ships we saw doing very well up against Armorfur, and Armorfur, if I recall, did very well against Drills. So one could infer that Climhazzard's probably going to have the upper hand in this match as well. Points are off to a pretty even start, but I think Climhazzard also has more damage on the field too, because each of those spinners is carrying a large plasma, whereas Drill's Brawler only has 6. But at the same time, the large Brawler will survive under direct fire more than any of the spinners will. A lot of this, I think, is going to come down to behavior as well, but Climhazzard's fleet seems to be behaving well, and the scoreboard is reflecting a continued advantage. I still really do like the Pulsar frigates, laggy bastards though they may be. And with round 1 having gone pretty securely, I imagine round 2 won't be that much different. And you can see the point lead just getting more and more in favor of Climhazzard the whole time. One of Climhazzard's spinners going down, but he has spares. And Drills is running out of ships pretty quickly. And Climhazzard takes the match. So up next we have Drills up against Husk. And I feel like here Husk has a pretty tremendous advantage. I feel like the order brawlers are going to be able to outbrawl Drills' ships, and they're actually rather nimble for as dangerous as they are. And yeah, the reason that physics bending, or that fast spinners are banned, is because they break the game, essentially. They can move almost infinitely fast in any direction at any time, and the AI is able to fire weapons with laser precision at any range. I forget, I think it's like Herald of Dawn or something. It was a fleet that Splinter submitted a couple months ago. It's why delayed spinners are banned, but it also demonstrates why spinners were banned in the first place. It kind of does both. The description of it in the archive is just no. It should make it stand out pretty well. It's like the only one with a short description. I thought that was Daybreaker. Or am I getting the two mixed up? Yeah. the Daywakers. Or as I prefer to call them, the Daywalkers. I do like Splintech Industries. Mostly because it gave us the green phosphorus. And holy shit, is that a ship. But with a gigantic point lead in favor of Husk, I think we can say Husk is going to be taking round 1. And with the way that the first round went, I don't think the second is going to go that much different. And Husk takes round 1. Splinter's trying to take the word shotgun approach, where if you just take enough sides eventually, afterwards you can point out that you were right the whole time, and then you just hope no one pays enough attention to be able to call you out on it. But we're seeing another big point lead in favor of Husk, as anticipated. So I'm imagining he's going to be taking round 2 as well. Names are really just memes in disguise. We're not all Mons. Just everyone but you. What else is there? The melee spikes are triangles. Illuminati use triangles. Melee spikes are Illuminati confirmed. And Husk wins the match. So up next we have Floof up against Flypaste. I feel like Floof might actually give Flypaste a bit of a trouble time. Flypaste handles himself well against brawlers, but Annihilators have a bit more reach and a bit more punch than Plasma Cannons. Plasma Cannons are a sustained damage weapon, whereas Annihilators kind of revolve around that initial fire. Flypaste is doing a good job of cleaning up the rammers though, but I feel like these Annihilators are going to be problems for Flypaste's larger ships. As you can see, the Brawler just taking one of them apart. The smaller ones are able to avoid the Annihilator fire pretty effectively. but the larger ships are having a much harder time of it. I think this is the real fight here to watch. Now the proton beams actually do outrange the annihilators, so if the ship stays at proton beam range, it'll be fine. But if it tries to move forward, then bad stuff will happen. You can see just big sections of ship just getting removed. But Flypaste does have a pretty sizable point lead. Looks like at the very least Flypaste will be taking round 1 with very few casualties. Flypaste may yet have this one in the bag. Ooh, a couple good hits from those annihilators though. Took out one of Flypaste's ships. Narrowed the point gap quite a bit. And I think that might be the first or second time we've seen Floof's brawler actually get destroyed. Flypaste's little fleet full of assholes doing its job. And round 1 goes to Flypaste. Another showing like that would be pretty convincing. Yeah, the vicinity fleet was pretty nice. I had never considered 3-barrel Tinkerel before. I'd always used 2, and never been overly fond of 1. Yeah, Flypaste appears to be doing better this time around, which he did well last time. So better is a hell of an improvement then, I guess. But yeah, you got all the little ships sitting back harassing at range. The big ships sitting back harassing at range. I'm pretty sure Flypaste has some torpedoes in there too, somewhere. Yeah, there's the torpedoes. And there goes one of those little mortar ships that Flypaste was talking about. They are, in fact, super ballsy, which may not be the best trait for a small ship, but Flypaste takes the match. So next up we have Floof up against Climhazzard. You can see the front section of Floof's rammer just getting cut apart on the charge. Although I don't know that they're really rammers per se. They have too many guns to really just be rammers. Yeah, now that Flypaste Brawler seems to be done watching ASMR videos, I think it getting involved is going to be a bit more productive. But I think it's punching through a little bit too slowly. I don't think it's going to be able to make up any real point difference. And Climhazzard has built up quite a bit of point difference. I like these twitchy little monsters. Like squirrels on coffee. But I think it's pretty fair to say that Climhazzard's going to be taking round 1 here. Let's see. Each of these little guys has a shield. 4 thrusters per side with 8 sides, so 32 thrusters. That's what? 256p in thrusters. 80 for the shields, 300. 336. 12 for the core, 348. They won't stop using their damn thrusters though, so it makes it difficult to actually count. And I think Climhazzard may have fallen asleep. Oh, the hubcap ones? 8, looks like. And up next we have Floof up against Husk. Melee v melee. You can see the spinners with their... I hate melee spikes. Digging through stuff. Because that's how spinners do. Just a tiny little rammer accidentally drove through Floof's ship and cut its nose off. Shit's dumb. Yeah, theater mode with most browsers is the F11 key. And so now we're just waiting while these ships fire their crap at each other. But looks like Husk will be taking round 1 on points. And probably round 2 very similarly. Huge point gaps are generally not a coincidence, even with rammers. Yeah, Sentinels are masterfully good at the stare, which is not a great thing. And Husk takes the match. So up next we have Flypaste up against Climhazzard. Climhazzard been doing very well so far in the tournament, and Flypaste very nervous about this fight. Well, Clem should be able to read it if he's watching the stream, since the text is just on the screen. That is, of course, assuming he switched back to full screen and he's not watching it on tiny, tiny laptop resolution. And yeah, Clem is off to a very good start. Round 1 looking very much in his favor. And yeah, I think if Clem's spinners get taken out too quickly, then you'd have a very big problem. But that all depends on the behavior of the rammers. The spinners are too slow to really avoid them, so it all depends on what the rammers decide to do. And with the way that Husk's rammers are built, their decisions are pretty arbitrary. Though that said, the cannons on Husk spinners are also noteworthy. Clem's been doing very well, but he's not out of the woods yet. Yeah, Climhazzard is bringing no shortage of missiles to the field. Well, I mean, torps are great against slow-moving targets. Pretty hard to use well against fast ones. Alright, have a good night, Floof. Appreciate you joining us. We're in the second pool. We're on the back half of it, but still in the second pool. Yeah, unfortunately the number of competitors we had was, I think it was 20 people. So it would either be 4 pools of 5 with an 8-person champion pool, or 7-7-6 with a 6-person champion pool. And up next we have Flypaste up against Husk. Flypaste fleet doing a pretty good job of tagging those rammers and not being in the way of the rogue melee spikes. At least so far. An important little bit for success. But he does still have to deal with all of those brawlers. And the brawlers are where almost all of Husk's point investment comes from. But a decent point lead for Flypaste. Does bode pretty well. Hey Iceborne, you were in the first pool. Not sure. Yeah, you were in the first pool. You didn't quite make the champion pool, unfortunately. But yeah, happy birthday. The plasma condenser ship earned its keep pretty hard. Messed shit up good and proper. The mortar ship being ballsy. Like this guy. And Flypaste tanks round 1. I don't know, personally, if I were in a tiny ship and somebody was like, hey, go fly up and irritate that thing that could accidentally kill you, I think I'd say okay, and then probably not do that. But yeah, those mortar distractors are doing their job pretty well. And yeah, maybe I won't be hired to that kind of position. Maybe. But I suppose that all depends on how much I berate somebody's submission, I guess. Because if it's like the guy who's assigning positions, he's just like, this guy called my fleet shit, so he gets to fly the dumb plane. There's only a 700 point gap coming in here in the last minute. Or, well, 500 now. But, does look like Flypaste has a pretty good chance of clawing back on this one. As he's pointing out in chat, Flypaste's fleet tends to leak a lot of points early in the match, and then make them up later on. Yeah, one of the early rammers took the front section off one of Flypaste's ships, which also nets a bunch of points really early. But we're now looking like Flypaste is going to take round 2 and the match. Terrible amalgamation of Duke Slayer and Tank Husk. Just call it Dusk. And there it is. Flypaste won by about 250 points. But now we have Climhazzard up against Husk. Let's see how this goes. Climhazzard's hubcaps are a little less mobile than some of the other things we've seen, and you can see the rammers just having a field day with it. Even Husk's brawlers are being a bit of a problem for Climhazzard's fleet. The plasma bolt and annihilator volleys are quite devastating. And this round is looking very much in Husk's favor. One of the important things to keep in mind is that 24 of the ships in Husk's fleet are those tiny rammers, and in total they're only worth something like 3k or so. And so killing all of them doesn't really award points for shit. You have to kill the brawlers. And that is a far more daunting task. And it's looking like Husk will be taking round 1. And there's the first one. I imagine this one will go fairly similarly, as one of the missile ships decides it wants to hug one of the melee ships, which of course goes a lot better for the melee ship. And this hubcap's just getting torn apart. Cool guys don't look at explosions. I thought this was pretty well established by now. I'm also looking forward to what Splinter submitted. I looked at it and made sure it passed the rules, but I didn't really pay attention to what it did. So I'm sure there's all sorts of dumb shit. Looking forward to that. And there's a bunch of jokes you can make about his fleet name too, which is fantastic. Any joke's a dick joke if you want it bad enough. And round 2 looking much like round 1, going in favor of Husk. And so soon we should have a pretty good idea who will be moving on from the second pool. And it's Husk and Climhazzard. So congratulations to the two of them, and thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.